Well, welcome. We are so happy you have joined us as we kick off our new series called The Real Jesus. We're going to be looking on the weekends at different aspects of Jesus, and then during these videos in the midweek, we're going to be digging a little bit deeper into our topic. And the cool thing about this is that it's a church-wide series, meaning if you have grade school kids or teenagers, they're talking about the same topics on the weekend. So this is a great way to maybe kickstart some family discussions. We'd love to see that happen. And also, it's a great lead up as we talk about Jesus into the Easter season. So join us for every week of this series. We hope you enjoy it. So let's begin. If someone wanted to get to know the real you, how would they go about doing that? Do you think maybe they could check out your social media? You know, look at your Twitter account, your Instagram feed, where they get an accurate picture of who you are? Chances are probably not, because we have a tendency to just put our best foot forward on social media. People might get a snapshot of you, but not a full picture. So, what's the real way to find out the real you? Could they look at your tax return or your credit score or your bank account? Would that tell the story about who you are? Would that information reveal the real you? Chances are you're probably sitting there going, no way, that's not the real me. Well, what if we talk to someone who maybe doesn't look at you so favorably? Maybe that neighbor next door who is frustrated because your dog barks every night. Or maybe that student sitting next to you in school who wants to copy your homework and you never let them. Maybe they would not have such favorable things to say about you. But we know you're an amazing person. Would they give us the true story about who you really are? Probably not. How about someone who maybe knows just a part of you, like your neighborhood barista or your barber or your grocery store checkout clerk? What if they just caught you on a bad day, when you were sad or mad or just having a bad hair day? They probably wouldn't have a very accurate picture of the real you, would they? Well, you might be sitting here going, why are we going through this exercise? Well, what we want to look at today is that there are a lot of ways that we can dig into someone to find the real them. And we see that there are some things that just kind of clutter up our view of how we view someone. Some things that just need to be cleared away so we can see the real you. Well, that's what we want to do this week. That's what we want to do this whole series, is we want to push away some clutter and take a look at the real Jesus. I've found over the years of trying to help people discover the real Jesus that there are some things that just get in the way, that clutter up the clear picture of who he really is. We need to get past the junk and discover who the real Jesus is. Now, this might sound a little bit crazy, but one thing that can often get in our way is religion. I know that just sounds strange, but religion can often obscure the very thing it's trying to reveal. It's not done intentionally, and when we can clear away the clutter and the excess junk, Jesus can emerge. Now, the religion of Christianity can be a barrier or just clutter to our view of Jesus. But the bottom line is that Christianity is fundamentally about a relationship with a person named Jesus. There are some things that we as Christians hold dear, like our beliefs about the world and how we value and treat other people, our rituals and practices that point us to God and help us connect with Him. But for some Christians and many non-churchgoers, these good things have just kind of cluttered up their picture and sadly become a barrier to them seeing the real Jesus. So how do we do this? How do we get to the real Jesus? So for just a short time, I want to help you put your religion aside. And during this series, we're going to be exploring how Jesus was known and perceived by people he came in contact with, people he encountered, people who chose to follow him, and people who chose not to follow him. And then we're going to look at what all of that means for us today. So to just be honest, I admit that there might be some of you out there who are just uncomfortable talking about Jesus. You might have some doubts about the person of Jesus, or maybe even on a larger scale, you just have doubts about God and religion in general. Sometimes these very doubts can clutter our vision and understanding of the person of Jesus, and that is totally understandable. It's a good thing to acknowledge our doubts. It's a good thing. And when we acknowledge those and the causes of those doubts, we can get closer to the truth. And doubts come in all shapes and sizes. For example, we might doubt because of our family background. Our family background, that family of origin. You know, I was raised in a home where we did not talk about God every day. God was just kind of relegated to 1 hour on a Sunday morning as we sat in the hard pew. Jesus wasn't a part of my family dynamics. That might be some of you who are in the same situation. And you might have doubts because you were raised in a family like mine, where God was just equated with that 1 solitary hour on Sunday morning. Obviously, our family of origin plays a huge important role in shaping our view of God. Studies indicate that if a child has a strained or non-existent relationship with their earthly father, they're going to struggle to find a relationship with a loving heavenly Father. Do you think that maybe your family background could be an issue for you in your relationship with God? It might be. So what's the first step to take in figuring all of this out? Well, for me, it helped me to take a look at my own personal situation. What are the things that help shape and mold me? What people and experiences have contributed to shaping me into the person I am today? When looking at Jesus in history, it helps when we start by looking at our own preconceived ideas. So start with your own history. Another reason we can struggle with doubt is because of the bad behavior of Christians. And boy, have we seen some bad behavior out there. Maybe you've had a bad experience with a Christian or a church, and it just left a sour taste in your mouth. Maybe you met someone at school or work, or maybe there's someone in your family that all they do is talk about the Bible and church and Christianity, but they are living such a hypocritical life. I've known people who have grown up in churches that all they do are talk judgmentally. They preach hellfire and brimstone, and they almost say with glee, "Good news, you're going to hell." Well, in those churches, there's just not room to welcome people who might be struggling with real world problems. And unfortunately, these days, there's a whole nother issue. Sometimes politics can get in the way. Some Christians associate one particular political ideology with Christianity. And if their personal political leanings are a different persuasion, it can really shut down any discussion about Christianity or Jesus. Do you struggle in your faith because of the behavior of some Christians or some experiences you've had in church? These can be big barriers to discovering the real Jesus. And finally, I think we sometimes struggle because we compare our faith with the faith of other people. Now, a person that might really help us understand that is a person in the Bible. And he wanted Jesus to come and heal his troubled son. And this father offers this plea mixed with doubt. He says to Jesus, "If you can, help us. Please, if you can do it, come and help us." And Jesus answers in this way in Mark 9. "If you can," said Jesus, everything is possible for one who believes. Immediately the boy's father exclaimed, "I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief." Some people doubt because they compare their faith with the faith of other people. And they say, "I have met church people who they were just born believing. They came out of the womb without a single doubt. And they have a relationship with God, and they talk to him like he is right across the table from them." But you may think, it doesn't come easily for me to believe. I struggle with so many questions all of the time. Well, no one on earth has a perfect faith, and no one is without doubts. All of us, me, you, everyone, even the person who seems supremely confident in their faith, they all have a mixture of faith and unbelief. I love in this scripture where the dad says, "I do believe, but help me overcome my unbelief." Boy, I can relate to that one. That's where so many of us live. I believe, or at least I try to believe. Help me with my unbelief. So we may have some good reasons why we doubt, but there is one fundamental doubt that we want to talk about today, and that's, did Jesus even exist at all? If we're going to spend this series looking at the real Jesus and try to discover him, the very first question we have to ask is, was he even a real person? Did he even exist? World historians agree, yes, there is evidence that this person, Jesus of Nazareth, really lived in the 1st century. And we have good evidence of the many things he said and did. And there are 3 major sources of historical records regarding Jesus. One is from the Romans who lived in the 1st and 2nd centuries. For example, there was a man named Tacitus who wrote a biography of the Emperor Nero. Maybe you remember that name from some of your history classes in school. But in 64 AD, there was a big fire in Rome. And some people blame Nero. They said he burned down this city so he could complete this big building project. And as the fires were raging, Nero started to blame the Christians. Tacitus, who many consider to be the greatest of Roman historians, mentions that Christians are followers of Jesus who was put to death by Pontius Pilate. Proof that he was a real person. He existed. Another Jewish writer in history who lived in the 1st century was named Josephus. He mentions that Jesus was called Christus, or Messiah, and then he had a brother named James. And there are several other Roman historians and Jewish writings that speak about Jesus as a very real person. Now, these writings are not all favorable toward Jesus, not at all, but they speak to the reality and reliability of a real person named Jesus who lived in history. In other words, we can believe a real Jesus in history because of the testimony of the Roman government. For me, I've done a lot of research lately into my own personal ancestry, and it's been a lot of fun to dig into records. I've gotten to look at some old census records and military records, and I see people's names and birth dates that were part of my family, and I see that they're real and they lived in certain places at certain times. And that's what we have of Jesus. Because of the Romans' records, we see that Jesus was a real person who lived in history. And none of the writings that we have from ancient Rome or ancient Jews dispute the existence of Jesus. It's just not really up for debate. It means we have government records from Rome, a sort of profile of a historical man named Jesus. The second reason I think we can trust the basic reliability of the Bible is because it's based on eyewitness testimony found in the New Testament. Eyewitness testimony. Let me just give you one small example. There's a bunch of them, but let me give you this one. And it's from the book of Mark. As we read the story of Jesus carrying his cross to its final resting spot, we read how Jesus was so beaten and tortured and abused that he couldn't go any farther. And he fell to the ground, and a Roman soldier grabbed a man out of the crowd to finish the job and carry the cross up the hill. And that man's name is Simon of Cyrene. Simon, who lived in a town called Cyrene that is in modern-day Libya today. He helped Jesus carry the cross. Now, Simon of Cyrene is mentioned in 3 of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, but in Mark it says one little detail that's really easy to miss, but it's important, and it's going to help us understand what I'm talking about. Mark 15:21 says, "A certain man from Cyrene, Simon, the father of Alexander and Rufus, was passing by on his way in from the country, and they forced him to carry the cross." So why does Mark add that detail? You might think, oh, because there were several Simons who lived in Cyrene, and he wanted to make sure we understood which one. You know, the dad of Rufus and Alexander. Well, that's not really what he meant. You see, when Mark was writing his letter, his gospel, he was writing it to people in the church in Rome. And do you know who were members of that church in Rome? Rufus and Alexander. They lived in Rome. And so it's a way of saying, hey, here's the story of what happened. And if you don't believe me, ask them. Their dad was there. This was their dad. Check it out with them. I know sometimes on the weekend, my husband shares stories that are full of detail and fun. And people say, did that really happen? So they go up to our kids and say, tell us the truth. Is your dad saying the story the way it really happened? Well, that's all Mark is doing here, saying, if you doubt me, check out the details with Rufus and Alexander. They know the whole story. Well, the third reason we can trust what is read in the New Testament is because it contains a lot of embarrassing material. Embarrassing material. And what do I mean by that? Well, I mean in the biographical accounts of Jesus in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, it contains a lot of stuff that if it wasn't true, it never would have been written down. If I was making up a fictitious story to start a brand new religion with this hero named Jesus at the front and center of it, man, I would make this guy stellar, okay? The first thing, I would never have him be crucified. Because everyone who read or heard my story, whether Jewish or Roman, would equate crucifixion with one thing: criminal. And I would never make my hero be a criminal. It's just embarrassing. It wouldn't work that way. How about the story of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, right before he was arrested and led to be crucified? He's begging God, please God, if there's any other way we can do this, please don't let it be this way. I don't want to be crucified. Now, I would never make my hero like that. I would make him brave and saying, God, I will do whatever you ask me to do, and walking courageously toward the cross. I wouldn't write the story that way. Or what about when Jesus is hanging on the cross and he cries out? My hero in my fictitious story would say something like, God, I trust in you, O sovereign Father. But we know that's not what Jesus said. He hung on the cross and said, my God, why have you forsaken me? That sounds like an embarrassing story that leads me to believe what's written there is the truth of how it actually happened. And why would he have disciples? And there's no other way to say this, but sometimes the disciples just look stupid. Just stupid. Here are the early church leaders, the people responsible to spread the message of Christianity, and they did such foolish things. Like Peter denying Jesus when the chips were down 3 times. Why write that if it didn't really happen like that? There's just too much unhelpful, embarrassing material in the Gospels for the whole thing to be made up. Why believe the Bible is reliable? Because the Gospels report what happened, not what someone who is putting a spin on it, or a marketing firm, or a PR campaign claimed what happened when it didn't really happen. Clearing away the clutter, or setting aside what may have been a barrier, can help us see the real Jesus. The Jesus of history left a huge impact on the world. His influence is too large to even measure. We can't even begin to comprehend. So if we could set aside those things that clutter our view of him, we can get a glimpse into how significant his impact was. It is so important for those of us who call ourselves Christians to visit this essential truth of the real Jesus again and again. And if you aren't a follower of Jesus, you can just eavesdrop with one ear while I say this to Christians. It can be so easy for us to slip into following a religion and practically forgetting how real Jesus is. Our day-to-day lives can become simply a set of rules and principles to follow, or a philosophy we defend. Jesus came to earth as a very real person, not as a system, not as a religion. Committing to the person of Jesus sets us free from things, even though they're good, free from things that can cloud us, our vision, from what's most essential and most important. Well, as we continue on in this series, know that we are praying for you, that you can find the real Jesus and experience him. So God bless you.